Hello, everyone. Um, we're calling in from the UK, from Manchester in England. And welcome, everybody, to Recovery Live from Came to Believe Recovery. We usually you'll see Tom here. So Tom is away, beavering away, organising retreats and connections with people to help people who need to recover from addiction, from alcohol, and from other addictions. So I'm really delighted to be here with you. I might as well, seeing as I'm here, give you a little bit of an update on Came to Believe retreats and meetings, etc. So the USA have retreats that are coming up, and I'm sure that Kasara is going to put. Here we are. We've got Northern California retreat on the 5th to the 7th of May, which is it's very exciting. It's just like so exciting, all these retreats and all these different places people have been. Many of you will have heard about that there was a retreat held in the Bronx that was within a Franciscan friary where people in need were helped. There's also been some commuter retreats where people have come in from shelters and been able to go through the 12-step program in America. There's so much happening in America. I'll tell you a little bit about the UK. We can get a couple of links up for that in the next couple of weeks. So we have Hertfordshire retreat, which is I think it's the 15th to the 17th of April. I'm sure that Kasara will put me right if I'm wrong. And that's Hertfordshire. And that retreat's quite a small one this time, but small and beautiful. The last two retreats have been around 80 people, so it's quite good to have like a more personal retreat as such. Then also we have another retreat coming up in August, which is in Kent. So the Kent retreat is at the last weekend of August. So we look forward to that. That's usually a bigger retreat because we've got a venue which can hold more people. So we look forward with that for excitement. We just finished the retreat in North Pennines, which was fantastic. It was like, it was really fantastic. We started only with one retreat per a year for North Pennines, which is right in the north of England, right up on the borders of Scotland. And we started with that and just one a year over these last 2 or 3 years. And now we've got 2 a year. So we hadn't done one in March before, and we were full, and it was brilliant. And Cassie's on, and she says it's the most magical place. And she has attended the Minster Acres retreat, which is the one in the North Pennines. So it's a beautiful venue, and then the program's pretty beautiful as well. So that's told you a little bit about retreat. So I have a guest here today, and that is Donna. So I'd just like to welcome Donna onto. Hello, Donna.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Donna. Welcome. And we're going to, as you know, I'm just very hopeful I'm not going to sneeze. I just got a very big sneezy feeling in my nose. If I get a sneeze, everyone will forgive me. So Donna,
if I get a sneeze.
I didn't hear who said about the sneeze. Was that you, Donna?
No, that was my phone. Never mind. It was something, it echoed.
Was it?
It was an echo from my phone, yeah, because I had the Facebook app on and you came up on my phone. So I turned it off, though.
That was really funny. I thought, okay, somebody's talking about sneezing there, and that's funny. That's really funny. So our subject, and we have explored it a little bit before we started today, and the subject, we explore many things in Came to Believe. And, you know, when we're looking at people who suffer with addiction of any type, and if we're looking and talking to people that who are alcoholics, drug addicts, or food, sex and love, gambling, all those things, you know, there is certain language which is around, you know, that's used around the sector as such. And over here we call it the sector, you know, like the drug and alcohol sector. So we have two words that get used quite a bit in the sector are triggers and, well, it's actually another two words, coping mechanisms. And I think it would be really useful to have a little bit of an exploration of what that actually means. And I was thinking there after our discussion before that if we started with that, and maybe, so if I start with what I think of with triggers and coping mechanisms, and then maybe if you say what you think triggers and coping mechanisms, and I'd love anyone that's watching or involved with this actually commenting on the Facebook Live, to if you've got some what that means to you. So rather than you know, examples at this moment of what of triggering or whatever that is in what is it that would, you know, what is it that it means to you? So first thing for me, so I suppose if I was going to talk about triggers, I'd probably not talk about it in relation to you know, when I was using alcohol or drugs, because I don't believe that triggers caused me to drink or to use drugs. I believe it was you know, that I had an allergy and a mental state that preceded the drink or the drug or whatever. However, very soon after that weekend of me going through the steps, I then started on a step 10 process. And for anyone who doesn't know what Came to Believe is about, we work through the 12 steps. And, you know, we work the program as the founders did. And people are given the opportunity to recover, you know, to recover from a hopeless state of mind and body. But once you have been through that process, there's a life living that goes on. So what we call step 10. And basically what it means is that we have got things in our lives which maybe have affected us. So I think of things like woundings that are deep, or a root thing that's deep inside me because I suffered some stuff when I was younger. And so that can be used. I would use the word trigger in that way, and look back perhaps before I recovered on the coping mechanisms I used to try and not drink, which probably didn't work, but to cope with the issues of it. So that's me. That's my sort of take on it. What's yours, Donna? Oh, you're on mute, Donna.
Sorry about that. Okay, so yes, triggers, like defining what they are. So to me, the definition of a trigger is anything that brings back thoughts, feelings, or memories. It's a trigger. And it doesn't have to be a negative thing. Something could trigger a pleasant memory. You know, you could smell something and think about, you could smell flowers and think about, so you could hear a song and that's also a trigger. But so a trigger is anything collectively that brings back a thought, feelings, or memories. And then I think it's also important to recognize that we have both internal and external triggers.
Yeah.
Because an internal trigger is a feeling, you know, whether it's an emotion of like fear or joy or anything like that. It's usually fear or joy, or pain. You know, so those are internal triggers. And then we have external triggers, which are people, places, and things.
Okay. So okay, and in fact, Sue Foreman has just commented that triggers are also called hot button. Mm-hmm. Hot button. So that's really another interesting thing. Yeah. So So coping mechanisms. So for a coping mechanism, when would that apply in your life? Because for me, it didn't apply with addiction for me because I was powerless over it. It wasn't but it certainly applied before I recovered as such. And then later I found that I still needed to cope with some of these feelings and stuff that were coming up in my life. So what about you for coping mechanisms?
Well, I think that if we back up a little bit, because before we can talk about coping mechanisms, I think we should maybe slip in there the ability to recognize the triggers, because you can't apply a coping mechanism to something if we don't know how to recognize, because we could be completely oblivious. Like I gave an example before, and I'll give it again. And this has nothing to do with addiction, but it's just a behavioral trigger. I could be on the phone with someone having a conversation and they say something that triggers me. Maybe it elicits anger or fear or resentment. And then I'm not aware of my feelings because maybe I'm not in a program or I'm not thinking about it. I hang up the phone and maybe one of my children walks through the room and then all of a sudden I'm yelling and screaming at them because I'm not aware. I didn't recognize the fact that I was triggered 5 minutes earlier. So I think that the important thing right now is so we know that we have triggers, internal and external, being able to recognize them so that we can either avoid them or realize when they're happening. So then we can apply a coping mechanism. So how do we recognize a trigger? And I think it's kind of based on it's being aware, it's mindfulness, which takes me to my step 11. If I'm doing my step 11 in the morning and I'm taking that time to meditate, then I'm practicing some level of mindfulness. If I am doing my step 11 every morning, I know what peace and serenity feels like. I know what a conscious contact with God feels like. So when I get pulled away from that during the day, I'm able to recognize, wait a minute, this is not what I want to feel like. So being able to recognize when you're okay and when you're not okay and why. And then being able to recognize and identify what just happened that made me feel that way. So you need to stop for a moment, like take that pause. Step 11 talks a lot about the pause when agitated, right? That's what the big book says. We stop, we think, what has got me agitated? What can I do about it? So we pause, recognize what's going on, and then we have the choice of what we're going to do about it, how we're going to respond to it, what coping mechanism we can apply once we know what it is. So that's where I think you talked earlier about step 10, but I think step 11 is really important in this too, because it gives us that ability to know what serenity feels like. It links us up to our higher power every morning so that we know that we have that as a major coping mechanism. And it also gives us that ability to pause during the day. Because if I'm not practicing mindfulness, I don't know why all of a sudden I'm yelling at one of my children. I may not link that to a conversation I had 10 minutes ago. Today I can. But when you're actively triggered like that, you don't know.
I absolutely love that you just said your higher power is your major coping mechanism. That is so cool. That is so cool. And in fact, I'm going to remember that, because that is just really, really, isn't it great when that's why these conversations are so good.
Yeah.
And I love the way you have linked it up to step 11, pause when agitated. Like from the big book, it says that we would pause. And so I'm like thinking about the coping mechanisms. Okay, so let's go back to triggers, like you say. I was going to just having a look there actually at what Cassie had said. So thank you for sharing that, Cassie, and it was shared on the screen as well. It's in the comments. So Cassie, a recovered alcoholic, has coped with the death of her father, the anniversary for the first time in 18 years, lead her back to a drink, which I think is so important. What I'm thinking here is like not to underestimate the need to understand that I tended not to call them triggers, but that doesn't matter. You know, it's almost like a PTSD to me of something that happened when I was younger. So that is like, that's how I've sort of like thought of it in my life. I don't want to underestimate that I may have recovered and I may be sober, but there is pain and grief and root issues that have happened in our lives that are really, really difficult. And I love a higher power as our major coping mechanism, as well as having psychological support. I mean, it says in the big book, I think it's page 131, or is it 133? I think it's 133, where it says, you know, God has given us doctors and nurses and psychologists and counselors, you know. I can't remember which of their pages. And it says, you know, that we should use them. So, you know, we should be using coping mechanisms that are helpful, but there are big opportunities for coping mechanism for us by working the program itself, and then that helps us to cope. But it's not the only way, and it says we've got no monopoly on God, doesn't it, in the big book? So so what do you, I mean, I'm just thinking about, isn't that an amazing thing that Cassie's just shared, that she, you know, didn't have to drink after you always drink when faced with that pain.
And I think a big part of like what Cassie just shared about her father's anniversary was just like, that's what she is also sharing with us, is that she experienced some awareness of that. She had awareness of it going into it. So that is one way, being aware of it and recognize it, is because sometimes triggers don't have to be like, that's an internal trigger. That's grief and sadness.
Yeah.
Right. But there's also like, just recognize, and that's, you know, that's a big thing, you know, the loss of a parent. And you can have other triggers, like external triggers, like for example, if you're in recovery and you find yourself in a bar, you know, that's a trigger. If you find, for me, certain things like, you know, tailgate parties can be a trigger to some people. Spending a lot of time with people who drink or use drugs can be a trigger. Those are your external triggers. And then the internal ones are like what Cassie just shared, like she was sharing that she was having grief. And also, like, I think triggers are a lot also like when you're overwhelmed by things that are going on, or you've experienced intense emotions of both like joy and fear. If you're afraid of something, those can be triggers, right? So if we become aware of them, and one of the coping mechanisms that I'd like to mention, because I think it's really important, is the concept of journaling. And maybe even having something like what we call a trigger journal, where when you notice that something triggers you write it down in your journal. Like you write down like the things that and then you know that maybe if you're not feeling really well, that maybe these are things that you need to avoid for a while, you know, or like people, places, and things. Vacations were a big trigger for me, going away on vacations. I couldn't avoid going on vacation, but I could ask my family to maybe, you know, if they're drinkers, to not have alcohol around and things like that. That was a big trigger. That was an external trigger for me. Internal triggers also, but I think it's important to, if you have a journal, or if you at least get it down on paper, then you're aware of what they are, just like Cassie just shared. Like she was aware of the potential trigger of the upcoming of the anniversary of her father's death. So if you get it down and you're aware of what it is, then you can apply your coping mechanisms. You know, those high risk situations. If you feel like you're getting into a high risk situation, you know that it's something that's going to trigger you. That, okay, how am I going to cope with this? Am I going to ask for support? Am I going to go to a meeting and talk about it? Am I going to talk to my therapist about it? You know, meditate, practice your step 11, fellowship, right? And God.
Oh yeah, that major coping mechanism.
Yeah.
I'm thinking here that it's very interesting, because you brought up at the beginning, and we're still, you know, and we're talking about it here, about the internal things that happen that people can call triggers, and then the external. And I think that's really important to differentiate. I mean, like, for example, grief is really, really, it's natural. People will grieve, and whether or not you've been through the steps, as we would say at Counterbelieve, if you're listening and you don't know what we do, we take people through the 12 steps, and people are able to recover from addiction. They get a defense against the drink or the drug, and or whatever the behavior is. But the thing is that life happens, and so may not be something that's happened in the past. You might actually get something, grief that happens. I mean, I've had bereavement over the last 22 years since I last had a drink. I've had bereavements, and I can drive past on the motorway that we have here, past a stop where somebody was very important in my life, who died unexpectedly, totally unexpectedly, who I'd known and been in a relationship when I was 15, and had sort of met again to be in my life, and he died of lung cancer. Now, if I drive past that place where he lived, and I used to go off to go and see him, I get like a memory of the pain, and I've yet to drive past without crying. But and then there's the grief, like grieving, waves of grief. It's like a tide sometimes with grief, and we suffer, a bereavement or something terrible happens, and we, we're gonna have to go through that. So they're like, some of those are, if we're working the program, and like you say, practicing step 10 and 11, we're likely to be able to deal with it. We're not going to go under with it. We're not going to be, we're not going to be drowned by the tide, or, and tears. There's nothing wrong with tears, that we might need to cry. So I was thinking about that. And also then I was thinking about the external triggers, and I was wondering what people who are watching think, is, because the big book talks about, that you should be able to go into, into places where there's drink. You should be able to go to people's houses where they drink, that if not, you still have an alcoholic mind or an addict's mind if you're not able to be there. However, in the early days, you've got to try and keep yourself safe, in those early days. I went out last night with some friends to see a concert, and people were drinking and maybe doing other things, I don't know, around me. I don't get a trigger from that. It doesn't trigger me at all. I can be there. I have no desire. I mean, so that's a bit sort of different, isn't it? So what do you think about that, Donna? I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think that's really important. I think what you just said is key, because like the 10th step tells us that we can go anywhere and we can be around anything, that we've developed a sense of neutrality to alcohol and the presence of that. And that may be very true. And if the big book says it, then this is what they experienced, right? So we know that. And that is my experience today. But it wasn't always that way.
No.
When I was just first starting out, even with the steps and with a good sponsor, I still found that there were people, places, and things that there were certain people I definitely couldn't be around. I had no business being in a bar. I can go to a bar today, but these are not places where I belong. I had no reason to be there, So yes, I would say that in early sobriety, people, places, and things, or anything that's going to trigger that, or even activities. There's certain things that I used to associate with drinking. A beautiful summer day, sitting out on my deck, it would be the most natural thing in the world to have a glass of wine with me, right? So not to say I couldn't sit on my deck, but I needed to recognize that the warm weather was a trigger. It was something that made me think, it would be so nice if I could go outside and have a drink this afternoon, right? Sounds crazy, but that's just how I think. So yeah, in early sobriety, I think we have to develop, and I think that's when a trigger journal is helpful, because as you get through the steps and you are recovered, as we do become through the 12 steps of AA, you will have that feeling of neutrality, and it will be okay for you. You will have overcome the helpless state of mind and body. But in the beginning, I think it's really important I was very close with my sponsor. I used to call her a lot and ask her. I'd say, well, some of my friends are getting together for a girls' night out. Well, that's interesting. Where are they having it? Oh, we're going to a bar. You have no reason being there. I just had no reason to be there, so I didn't go. If there's a wedding that I'm supposed to go to, then I go because I'm invited guest. It's an obligation. I go. But then I have to come up with coping mechanisms, because that was very triggering to me, because most weddings are open bars, and far be it for me to pass up a free drink. Right. So then I'd have to have my coping mechanisms, knowing that I was going into a situation where there was going to be free flowing alcohol. And I did employ those coping mechanisms. And that was usually whatever was suggested to me by my sponsor at the time. But I really think that, and I said this before and I'll say it again, I think the key thing here is mindfulness, like knowing what you're feeling, paying attention to your feelings. And we pay attention to everyone else's feelings around us. Like, I wonder how she feels about this, and I wonder how he's going to feel if I say this. But, we are also deserving of paying attention of our own feelings. And when something doesn't feel right, to be mindful of it and take a step back and recognize why you're feeling that way, and what may have just happened that caused it. Recognize it as a trigger. And then, the other thing is sometimes we don't really need like a coping mechanism. You don't need to run off to therapy or run to a meeting. Sometimes it's just a matter of recognizing that you just entered a negative space, and then invite God into that negative space with you and say, God, I'm inviting you into this negative space. What is it that you're trying to show me? What is it that you need me to know or learn here? Because usually when we are feeling that, it's something that we can learn from the situation. So it kind of flips it from being a negative space or a negative feeling into a learning opportunity. So I would say that, and again, I'm going to go back and repeat that I think mindfulness and recognizing is important. And how do we be mindful? I don't even know, because we live in such a high-speed society, but I think a lot of it is taking the time. I don't care if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, as long as you can sit, but practicing some type of meditation every morning, which the 11th step really focuses on. It is very important for us, because as former alcoholics and addicts, we are on full throttle most of the time and not taking the time to stop. We go full speed ahead. So I think it's really important. It's a hard discipline, but it is a discipline.
I think it's a discipline as well. And so Sue Foreman has, acknowledged how important that you have said, and it was shared before about recognizing and naming it, naming what it is, the issue, which I think is, and mindfulness as such. I haven't gone to a mindfulness class, but I understand what you mean by mindfulness, because that is what I also practice in the process of how I work the steps. I just think, and this is, again, it's about, because we were saying before that the word triggers has become quite, especially in the drug and alcohol field in the UK, you'll hear it a lot by, like, say, younger people will talk about it, as you mentioned. And, and I go into drug and alcohol services, which don't necessarily do the 12 steps, but help people who are maybe heavy drinkers, maybe not alcoholics or drug addicts, but and they might help people of all sorts. But that word gets used a lot. And I think it's just like really important to be able to go back and say, well, what does that word mean? If it's going around and being bandied about a lot, which it is, what does it mean? I was really interested in what you were saying about that, out of the blue, something will happen, especially in those early days. And but I don't think it is just the early days. A thought will come in, which you've got a defense, you're doing okay. I'm talking about people who've been through the program now rather than people who haven't. So you go into that environment. We've got somebody sharing, Cassie again has shared about her motives being good. It says, doesn't it? You need to go in, you need to have a good motive going in. If you're going to be attending to business, attend to your business. This is all in working with others, the chapter working with others in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Also, and it says you've got a good reason for going, not to, I think it says not to get any vicarious pleasure out of it. In other words, I wonder if it was like drinking. I'll just watch everybody else and think about it. But I thought that it probably links back to step 10, where it says in the step 10 promises, where it says we'll seldom think of alcohol. And it doesn't say never, does it? Or never think of drugs, or never think of the thing that you might relapse over. It doesn't say you'll never think of it. I mean, we've got lots of habits, and it says seldom, but it says that if you're working the program, that you recoil as if from a hot flame. And so that comes into it. But, sometimes I get, we're helping each other, talking to my fellows, and it hasn't just been recoiled like a hot flame. It might have stayed a bit longer, that thought. Right. And and I suppose that's where you need like step 7, isn't it? About removal of the thought. The step 5 promises and the motive behind going into places which could be external triggers or a stimulus to start thinking that things that aren't really very good for you. I mean, I don't know. Sue says the word trigger has an explosive sound to it, and that's why I now use button. Yeah, It's funny. I probably am a bit uncomfortable with the word trigger. It's funny. I have to. I suddenly realised with Sue saying that's why I've used other words. I've used other words, and I didn't know. I've just named it. That I had a slight issue with the word. And Sue says, I think of it as an elevator button that invites me to go deeper and higher, just as Donna suggested to do that. To do that in the moment. So that's. Well, I've just had 2 revelations while I've been on the live.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that Sue made, because if we want, we can look at triggers or button negative experiences as that, or we can look at them as another opportunity to know a little bit more about ourselves. And that is our process of growth and self work and self-exploration, which is also part of our program, because we talk about that in step 11 again, and working on ourselves and getting closer and closer to who and what God wants us to be, and knows who we can be. If we just get that stuff out of the way, and it's good. And step 10 says it's not, we don't say if it comes up, but when, because these things will come back. They don't just magically, they will come back because of the world that we live in, the type of a world that we live in. So we just need to, I make it sound so easy, like, we just need to be aware of it. But an awareness is hard. I know, like, if I'm at work and I'm totally entrenched in what I'm doing and something's happening around me, I'm not really being mindful at that moment in time. But it's, like I said, I think it's something that comes with practice, like anything else. We aim for progress, not perfection.
Yeah, that makes sense. And wow, this has been a great conversation. Yeah. I wanted to just acknowledge that that Jamie is she said hi, which is really cool, and she's also saying that that she's goes to a meditation meeting, so she goes 7 days a week. She does that. It's great. And sharing with us. And Marlene has Marlene's identified that practice which comes out of the big book, which if you're like, so I don't know in the morning, so meditation, mindfulness, you're in that process. Part of that for me is saying, I want, please God, direct my thinking, I divorce my thinking from, all these, selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and, like all that. Self-pity is one of them. Oh, it's a big one to make sure I don't go down the route. Well, Marlene's talking about that once she's done that, it's like that step 6 and 7 experience. So you name it, don't want that, go, step 7. But then she's saying to be filled, and this is in the step 9 prayers. This is actually in the step 9 prayers, asking God to fill you with tolerance, patience, and kindness and love, and noticing that is helpful. So she's then saying that it keeps her pretty free from being triggered, because if she feels a negative emotion, she's, it's that part that's affected. So reality is, so that's step 6 and 7, which is part step 10. All the rest of our lives is actually working, because you're like saying you don't want that thing, or asking that, or telling that thing to go, but being filled with the opposite, like the assets that it's got. So that's really interesting, isn't it? Well, I don't know. What do you think, Donna?
I think that, that's a basic tenet of the 12 steps, is practicing patience, kindness, tolerance. Those are all gifts of the spirit, or fruits of the spirit, I should say. So those are all things that I try to bring in. And I've just learned, I don't know if it's age or the program, but I've learned to just kind of be quiet and accept a lot of what I'm seeing and going. The other thing that Marlene mentioned, and I'm trying to scroll down to see, let me see. She mentioned a very important thing in the second part of her comment. Thank you, Marlene, for commenting. And this is really important. I was going to talk about this. When she's talking about practicing things like her health, sorry, I keep getting these pop-ups. Practicing weight, health, other people's opinions, and career progression, keep me pretty free. So she's talking about practicing self-care. And that was the other thing I was going to talk about. That's practical stuff that we can do. So things that keep us more resilient to triggers are when we feel like we have some control over our well-being. And we can have some control over our well-being by practicing self-care. And by that, I'm talking about getting a good night's sleep, getting some type of exercise, eating right, making good decisions for ourselves, staying away from toxic people and leaving situations that are not good for us, when time over time we don't feel well. So practicing self-care can keep us somewhat freer from triggers. And that's what I think Marlene is saying as I read what she wrote here. She has control over her life, weight, health, and other people's opinion, career progression, etc. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and what she's also saying is that by being filled with patience, tolerance, kindness, and love, she notices when the things she hasn't got control over, because she's like, control's gone. So in a way, that's almost like, the control's got to go, because I think that when when the button is pressed with me, I'm obviously much more comfortable with that. When that button is pressed for me, I can then jump into control, starting thinking, and I start looking at that I'm the way I look. I can start looking at what people think of me. I can be really focused in on that, because I think it's something I can control, and it makes me feel better because the button's been put.
Right.
And I do really love, as you said, it's a gift. They're gifts of the spirit. So it is asking the spirit to bring us those gifts. I think it's like not assuming. I think that, anyway, this could be opinion, and you might have another angle on it. I don't think of the gifts of the spirit necessarily being something that we what's the word, that we access. They're there, but we don't access them. And we sort of ask God, and we give, our God is not a controlling God. So, pouring stuff on us that we don't ask for. So the gifts of spirits need to be sort of accessed, asked for, and to be filled with it. It's a bit like, as Christians, I'm a Christian, so I might be filled up with them. might be filled up with them. And Marlene has said it's the opposite. She doesn't control those things.
I see. I'm sorry, Marlene. I think we I misinterpreted your message. She's saying, no, the opposite. I don't control these. I have turned my life over to the care of God, so I don't have to worry about these things. Okay. Yes, I agree. Because we're living for another purpose now. We're not living to please others. We're living to please Him. Am I right?
Yeah, that's it. And I think what's really good about having this discussion about the fact that we don't have control over some things, and self-care is good. I mean, that's wonderful. There's no doubt. But I also find that I need to be practicing the program and not be full of defects like control to be able to practice self-care. So they need to go, and I need to be filled with the fruit of the Spirit, where it doesn't matter what I think, about it matters less about all these other things that used to trigger me or hot button me. And then right. I'm not on self-will. I think that's what,
yeah.
So yeah,
and
this
Sue
is really
saying, cool. Sue is actually saying, at some point I began to appreciate the buttons because I would recognize another area where I could heal or grow. Not always, of course, sometimes. Yeah, that's true. I was taught a long time ago to thank God for the people that push my buttons, because every time that button gets pushed, instead of being resentful, I'm grateful. Practice gratitude for the people that push your buttons, because every time they push a button, it gives me another opportunity to learn and grow. So yeah, so you can actually thank the people in your life that are really pushing your buttons, which is a great concept.
Well, I tell you what, I remember that in my early days of sort of healing and of being healed by God, like when I got Defense Against the First Drink, thought I was all sorted, and then I'm not sorted at all. I've got loads of things, and that those buttons get pressed, and I'm finding, and I've just lost shall I just be honest? I just completely lost my train of thought at that moment. I was about to say something really profound, of course, and it's not come out. So I'm going to back off that. Whatever.
Okay, you know what? I'll pick up what Sue was talking about, buttons, and I love that word, pushing buttons and buttons getting pushed. And the thing is that, and someone told me this a long time ago too, I may not get rid of the buttons completely, but they're going to get a lot smaller. I think that when I was in active drinking and in early sobriety, my buttons were huge. And I think everyone knew what my buttons were because it wasn't very hard to push them. And then as you get healthier and healthier and further away from drinking and closer to God, then my buttons get a lot smaller. And they're harder to find, and even when they are activated, I know how to how to deal with them, and it doesn't involve drinking. Whereas I can imagine with such big buttons, right? They were probably getting pushed all the time, all day long, and no wonder I couldn't wait to have a drink at the end of the day, because I needed to numb out from all those button pushing moments. And
I have just you have helped me find my point again, because you were talking about like the win the button pushing, and then there's like different people who might be engaged in button pushing, might even know they're engaged in button pushing. But I just remember in the early days when I was sort of going through a healing process through step 10 and 11, and some of it is quite, it can be a bit of a fiery thing, growing after you've recovered. It's like that there's some things in you that on a spiritual level that can almost like, so I was bullied when I was a little girl in the playground. I was a child that had been bullied a lot, and I made a big thing of this in my step 5. And then later on in my step 10, it came up again. And my sponsor sort of identified that I had passively bullied. And so I'd sort of gone along with it. So that was quite interesting, because I was this great victim. And then I'm suddenly realized I'm not so much of a victim because I'd gone along with it. But the other thing was that then while I was going through and this is on a spiritual level, I'm not talking on a practical level now, was that you know, that when you've had that happen, you almost like expect it of other people. So you expect they're going to bully you, or you expect they're going to, you know, like, I don't know, may not always be the word bullying. I'm just talking about that in my experience. And it happened a lot in my life, that it would happen again and again, that I would experience somebody with bullying behavior. And sometimes somebody I didn't expect it. And apparently you can, it's like, I think it's called transference in psychological terms. For me, I looked at it spiritually. It's almost like I'm defiling the other person to go and do that to me. And once I knew it, it's really bizarre. Once I knew that was the case, it stopped. It just didn't happen. I had people try it with me, but it didn't seem to come at me so much. So I don't know. That was my point anyway.
Okay.
So you've been asked to talk about boundaries as relating to internal and external buttons. This is Sue. She wants you to appreciate a button pusher. So obviously you maybe you've had a discussion with Sue before about this.
Maybe earlier. So internal boundaries, internal triggers. Let's talk about that first. So you have internal triggers, loneliness. Maybe loneliness is an internal trigger. Or maybe in a relationship, you know, maybe you have a very critical partner, and that's a trigger. So how do you set a boundary for that? And you set an internal boundary where, for me, this is what that would look like. I know this person is critical. I have decided, it's hard to explain how internal boundaries work, but it's more like, my boundary is set. I'm not going to say to them, I'm setting a boundary and you're not allowed to talk to me like that anymore, because there are certain people, if you say that to them, that's just giving them a green light to go ahead and say it over and over again. But what I might do is to myself, just say, you know, this person is speaking more about themselves than they are about me. And what I like to do with people like that is I have an internal saying. I say, bless them, change me. Bless them, ask God to bless them, because if somebody's being that critical, then, you know, so those are my internal boundaries. And then another way I set internal boundaries with situations or feelings is I will do my best to avoid being around certain people. That is also external boundaries. I'll talk a little bit about setting external boundaries. If I know that, okay, so I had a relapse about 8 years ago, and it was on Thanksgiving, and I had a house full of people, and I was entertaining, and I had all different types of things going on with families and stuff like that. So I recognized after doing a lot of work after that, I recognized that one of my triggers is entertaining, you know, having people at my home. I guess you would call it like performance anxiety or whatever. So then I had to realize that was something that triggered me. So what do? Well, you stop doing that then. You know, you just don't do that. Don't put that on yourself if it's going to bring that kind of pressure upon you. You know, having so many people in your house, everybody's drinking. You're allowing that to go on. You're under pressure. You have family members there who are all my most famous button pushers are my family members, because they installed the buttons. So they obviously know where they are. So, right. So all of that stuff. So, you know, and so I had to shift and create a boundary of, instead of trying to be super duper people pleaser and have everyone, I had to say, you know what, no, this year I'm not going to do it. I'm going to just have a small gathering and keep it simple, you know, because I recognize that those are external boundaries. If there's certain places, today I can pretty much go anywhere, but you know, I used to like to do my girls' nights out one night a month. Me and my girlfriends would go out, and we would all go out drinking. Well, I didn't do that in early sobriety. I had no business. That was I couldn't do that. And then the internal boundaries, like I said, are just recognizing when something makes me feel uncomfortable, sad, or whatever it is, and to recognize them and then set a boundary for myself internally. I try not to interact too much with the person who is pushing the button, because I find that some people, when they know that they've pushed your buttons, they like to push them even more. So it's more of an internal boundary for myself. I'm responsible for myself. I'm responsible for how I feel and how I react to things. And then what I might do is, if something does bother me a lot, I might start to journal about it or take it to therapy and say, listen, this is going on and this keeps coming up in it. Because life has a way of bringing things back around and around and around until we look at them and until we deal with them. So that's what I have
And
to say.
Cassie, so you are full of words of wisdom, Donna. So Cassie has said that she loves that you talk about other people installing these buttons, because that made me go, whoa, as well. And that links to what I was saying about, that I thought I was bullied. And then I found out some stuff about myself, and the people that would in the past had installed buttons or want to, or the type of person that might go, I don't know. I think it's on a sub-spiritual, don't know level where people do this. They sort of know instinctively that you've got that. I mean, whether you call it, like the higher power and the lower power, that knows that that's a weakness. It's an unhealed area as such. And the button pushing can go on. And I think that that's really what I was sort of like alluding to, in that now it doesn't push my buttons, because I know, and I also don't put myself in a situation. I also see the red flags earlier on with a type of person who might do that. But there is I don't have like I don't know, I'm just like whole. So somebody that comes to me, it's repelled. It's just repelled. And that's on a spiritual level as well as a psychological, because it is psychological as well. Exactly like you say, you would go, I mean, sometimes you do need to go to therapy for things. The big book tells us to do it. We don't just become so super spiritual. We're all, I think it says in the book, I think it's in, in The Family Afterwards, it talks about having your head in the clouds, in the spiritual clouds, but your feet firmly on the ground, so you need to have both. So
right. There's also another thing that I actually reread Sue's message, Sue Foreman, and she was saying, appreciating the people and the buttons themselves. So that's kind of what I was talking about before, that instead of looking like, oh no, here this comes again, I got to deal with this. It's like, thank you, God. Thank you for placing, so-and-so in my life today. And what can I learn from this? What can I glean from this? And when you go about your life in that frame of mind of gratitude for another opportunity to learn more about myself, there's very few people that you're going to be shying away from. And there's very few people that you're going to be afraid or resentful of, because you welcome them. And that's spirit of love and tolerance, which we're told in the big book to live in. We live in that spirit of love. Like, thank you, Lord, for bringing this unfortunate situation, because out of it I learned, A, B, and C. We're always being taught, because he loves us so much. He's always giving us lessons.
Exactly. And so we've got Marlene has contributed again. So I'm going to read out what Marlene says. I find that painful past memories and grief don't need to be buttons when they come up, if I don't get stuck into self-pity and forgive. As long as there was anger, that anger could come out in misdirected ways. I also had to accept the feelings of sadness and grief and learn to sit with them. Trust they would pass and try not to escape as I would when in addiction. Recovery has made me able to accept that I am not happy every day, but I can have peace in whatever is going on inside or outside.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, Marlene. Yeah, it's true. So true. And because life happens, just because we're sober doesn't mean that life isn't going to happen, isn't going to throw us, slings and arrows, but we could still have peace and joy. Happy is a feeling. Joy is a state of mind, and peace is a state of being.
And for anyone that is listening that is not recovered from addiction or alcoholism, etc., who is in that spiritual malady of pain, you know, I just want to say that what we're talking about here is not something you're just meant to be able to do. If you work the steps, you know, what I found is that that's how we're able to start getting to where Marlene has talked about. So there is, you know, we have retreats, the 12-step retreats. We have retreats that are virtual retreats. There are retreats all over the UK and the USA. I know that Tom is involved with talking in Greece to a shelter there to go over and start to, you know, show the people there about how to take people through the 12 steps as the founders did. So I think that I think we're moving towards the end of today, and it's quite funny because I was thinking, oh, I hope we'll manage to be able to, you know, fill the time. And we've filled it quite adequately with all the contributions, not only from you, Donna, with your profound wisdom, but also with the contributions of the group. And almost like I'm loving that we were like, well, yeah, you said that, but it's not quite that. And, you know, it's been a real conversation, which I think has been pretty exciting. And yeah, Cassie finishes off for the day. I think I'd like to finish off with what Cassie has to say. I think allowing ourselves to have these feelings and feel these feelings, but don't get stuck there. Move forward with it. Learn from it. It's just a bad feeling, not a bad life. So I think that's a good way to end. That's a good way to end.
So positive.
Yeah. So I'd just like to thank you, Donna, and release you from Recovery Live. And
thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
So just like to finish off here. Goodbye to everybody. I'm glad you enjoyed the conversation. There's a few people who said they enjoyed the conversation. And it's just our view, you know, and our experience. And there's a lot to take in there. But maybe it shows that there's more that could be discussed down the line. I'm going to still talk buttons rather than triggers, but that's obviously my thing. But bless you all. And from Came to Believe Recovery and from Recovery Live. Bye-bye.